Good morning, everybody. Rise and shine. This morning I have decided to talk a little bit about death. Tomorrow I have the honor and privilege of moving into the north out of the west. But yeah, this weekend I'm teaching a North Medicine Wheel online for the first time. So we're going to see how that rolls. And as a result, I get to leave the direction of the west, the place of the setting sun. And I wanted to start with a couple of quotes that I find really impacting and wise from Tagore that sort of pertain to the teachings of this direction of the west. One is, let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain, but for the heart to conquer it. And that's a quote that I've carried with me for, I guess, about 15 years now, that I hear inside me on the regular. Oftentimes when we are going through hard times, it's really easy to step into a place of victimization where we become powerless in our experience. And when we become victims of anything, we steal life from ourselves. The teachings in this work and the teachings of the West are the teachings of the warrior, the apex predators, and I've referenced them before. The orca whale, the black bear, the jaguar, these animals that walk without enemy. Traditionally, in all cultures, indigenous cultures, the jaguar wasn't hunted. Unless the jaguar perpetrated against a village, the jaguar was left to itself. The only species that would attack a jaguar would be a human, and that would be if a jaguar had attacked a village or something like that. Same thing is true in all native teachings that I have come across in the many years that I have been learning. Brother bear. When a bear is skinned, its body looks almost identical to a human's. There's a slight shifting in the proportions, but skinned, they look very similar to human beings. And again, they weren't hunted. Orca whale, same thing on this coastline. I do these videos from unceded territory, Coast Salish territory. And orca whale is a profound keeper of many houses on these coastlines. And again, there was traditionally whaling cultures, but in many cultures, the orca was not hunted. So these apex predators, and the orca is different from other whales because it is a carnivorous hunter, teach us how to face our fears, to cultivate and create courage. In the teachings, courage and wisdom, beauty, these things are not things we seek. They're things we create. We're not looking to a guru to give us wisdom. We are looking to the world to seed us as the garden so we may grow wisdom, so that we may grow beauty. And to do that, we have to accept, if we're looking at this metaphor of garden, what is the best fertilizer for a garden? Compost. All the stuff that's dead, all that food waste, gets all manky, smells really bad, shows you its death and its decomposition. And this death, the lives of what has come before, is what creates this abundant new life. I found out 3 days ago, I might cry a little bit, that probably one of the most beautiful people I've ever known passed away 4 weeks ago. And her brilliance, her name was Alona, goodbye. Her brilliance and her beauty was nothing short of stunning. And in hearing of her passing, she was young. I went through all the stages really quickly. I even got a bit angry because she, in living in the world, made me feel better in being in the world. And if I think of this, I think this is true of every human. Every human is an angel to someone else. And it was really great to be reminded so very tangibly in the midst of this time, this epoch shift and this pandemic, of that personal narration and that personal story of death that exists inside and that personal process. If you've never heard of Elisabeth Kubler-Ross or read any of her writing, I highly recommend it. My favorite book of hers is her life story. It's called The Wheel of Life. She is one of the people I hold as my great teachers, simply from reading that book. And she revolutionized how the entire Western world views death through a book that she wrote in 1976 called On Death and Dying. But really it's her life story that taught me so much. So I send that out as a highly recommended read. And one of the reasons her teachings were so profound to me is that when her mother suffered a stroke late in life, even with all of the background she was a psychiatrist, but had done ended up doing a residency in psychiatry, had been interested in pediatrics, but she ended up doing a lot of life after death studies. And in all her work on death up to that point, her mother's stroke really kind of brought home a lot of the teachings around death. And she realized that her mother, who had always cared for people and had never really let herself be taken care of, was put into a position of requiring care, and that balanced her out. That brought her an expansive understanding of life's offerings through this process of having to be cared for. And so losing my friend and someone who made me feel better about being in the world, and moving through these 5 stages, Elisabeth Kubler-Ross explores these 5 stages of grief or of death: bargaining, denial, grief, acceptance, and anger. All 5 of those energetics have to move through anytime anything dies. So death is something that we look at very much in our culture as a physical thing. But if we start to consider our relationships as organisms or as alive things, which we know they are, they change, they mutate, they grow, they adapt, we start to understand that death not only takes place within relationship, but also within our relationship to ourselves. And that each of these deaths will require these 5 stages. And in all of my observations over the last 25 years on this subject, I have yet to find them to not be accurate and conclusive. So those 5 stages again are bargaining, denial, acceptance, grief, and anger. And they will come at different points, and they will come in different amounts, and they will come. So when I lost my wolf that I'd had, that really was the guardian, Shambhala, her name was Shamba. She was my guardian for 16 years. She saw me out of being a teenager into being an adult. And when I lost her, I knew that I was going to have to move through those 5 stages. And I was worried that I would damage relationships by moving through those. And so I covered my windows for 5 days, and I stayed in my home, and I moved through those 5 stages. Some of them, most of the bargaining and the denial we often go through before the death itself. Sometimes with sudden death, we are navigating it afterwards, but generally, for example, in relationships, when a relationship death occurs, oftentimes it's the bargaining and denial that's kept us in the dynamic that might not have served. And it is oftentimes quite a bit later after that death itself of the relationship that we are in an acceptance of the death. Sometimes we don't. I had a friend whose mother was keying her ex's car 20 years later. No acceptance. So those 5 stages have to occur for us to be healthy. They have to occur for us to move on. And they occur even in the daily. They occur in our relationships with ourselves. So we are going to get angry at some point when who we are in the world, so we lose a job. And all of a sudden, that's a death. We're no longer going into the same work environment, meeting the same people. Our days change, the way our days look change. We're going to have to get angry about that at some point. But are we going to go and do that in such a way that we're now creating all of this conflict and new narrative and all of these different relationships? Because this very basic human emotion of anger needs to move. So anger is one of the ones that does a lot of damage. So does grief. Grief can take us out and those around us. But they are energetics. They are pieces of a universal weaving of experiences, and they are lines of connection to being human. And we fear them because emotions and all that go with them have been feared in our culture. They've been associated with the feminine. They are associated with the earth. And we have feared the earth. When we first colonized these sacred lands, we were terrified of the size of her, the size of trees and animals and the abundance of them. We were terrified of the dark, so we illuminated and we cut down nature to control her. In that same way, we have done that inside us. So we fear our own emotions. They are our roadmap. They guide us to where is the right place for us to be. So I'm going to close here because I feel like that's quite a lot of information to share today. But with all of the death that is occurring, so the death of these systems, the death of maybe our old life, the death of jobs, the death of humans, these people we are losing in the physical form. I invite us to start exploring some of these aspects of death and to understand that always after the night comes the day. These cliches, it's always darkest before the dawn, they have deep medicine teachings within them. The sun does rise, the earth keeps turning, and there will always be new life. My friends are suffering greatly in the midst of this pandemic with a forest fire in the Squamish Valley right now. And one of the things I know from spending quite a lot of time in areas that have gone through devastation, different countries, is how quickly fire rejuvenates the land. But it is one of the most brutal markings and scarrings that there are. But life comes back so quickly because the scarring takes place through fire and the rejuvenation and the rebirth sources from that carbon. So let us source from all of these places of death. I hope you have a really beautiful day. I hope that the death in the sweet night is peaceful and that we all dream a new world into being. All my relations.